Good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday morning, August the 27th, and shalom, shalom. It's a beautiful morning. Hope you're doing well. Let me say good morning to everybody. Good morning to my mom. I love you, Mama. Good morning. Hope you're having a beautiful morning. Good morning to Alice and to Pastor and Sister Martinez and to Rebecca. Good morning to Rebecca, and I see Dalton is watching. Good morning to you, buddy. Long time. And let me say good morning to Kelly and Barb Callahan and Kathleen and Sonia Valenzuela. Hola, hermana. Good morning to the Eddies, to Lauren and David and Levi and Valor and Haven and little Everett. Good morning to you as well. And to Carol and Sharon. And we just encourage everyone that if you're able to get on our New Beginnings Live at live.shalomaz.com. That's a great way to watch and to be able to all interact together. Let me say good morning to Ruti and to Menyan and Sonia and to Naum and Sarah. And good morning to Steve as well. And let's see here. And Cindy. Good morning to Tim and Cindy. And I think for right now, that's all I see. And that's okay. We're going to get started. And so this morning we're going to be in Jeremiah 27. We may possibly go through the whole thing. You know, we're hitting a section of Jeremiah where you really see there's a lot of narrative. So you see the history that's happening. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the world. That kind of gives us an idea of how God is, gives us a picture of how God is acting in history. I think that's the thing. The thing I love about narrative. I mean, obviously all the things where we come and we get this direct word from the Lord. I mean, that's always nice and clear and plain. But I don't know about you, but for me, it's not always so clear and always so plain. You know, we don't all necessarily hear the voice of the Lord with the clarity always that Jeremiah did. Sometimes we have those moments, but there are times where every day we're walking through historical context, right? Every day we are in history. History is the only thing about written history is it's just writing down the key events. But every moment of my day is my history, and so becomes my history. And so seeing God interacting with his people, seeing how God is working not just with his people, but God is working on a grand scale. And he's I've called it multi-dimensional chess, but it's not just it's so much more than that. It's the Lord working in multiple ways with multiple pieces, seeing how everything will impact things in generations, and understanding, allowing and using our own even willfulness as his tool. It doesn't mean he's taking away our will. It doesn't mean he is overriding our will, but he will work in such a way so that it works to accomplish what he intends to accomplish. So as we open in Jeremiah 27, right out of the gate, I just want to let you know there could be a little bit of potential confusion if you're reading from the TLV, because it opens up by saying, in the beginning of the reign of King Jehoiakim, the reign of Jehoiakim, in verse 1. And when you go down to the end of verse 3, it speaks of his little brother, the king who succeeded him, Zedekiah, king of Judah, or the king who succeeded his son, who is Zedekiah, king of Judah. So the fact is, the TLV translates it. So who is it? Is it Jehoiakim or is it Zedekiah? The TLV translates the Hebrew text correctly by saying, in the beginning of the reign of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, came this word to Jeremiah from Adonai, saying, and he goes on. It's almost universally accepted, though, and realized that this is basically had been a scribal error. Would be very few of textual copying errors, because as we read, there are a number of things in the context that make it clear this is not still the first year of Jehoiakim. You'll remember 26 was the first year of Jehoiakim, and the Lord had come with a warning. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't rise to be king until the fourth year of Jehoiakim. We know that from earlier, and so contextually, it doesn't make sense that it's Jehoiakim. Also, twice in this chapter, it refers to Zedekiah as king, and then in Jeremiah 28:1, in the following chapter, it opens up with, "Now it was the same year in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, king of Judah." So, rather than going through all of that, most translations will just fix the error at the beginning and say in the first year of the reign of Zedekiah. The TLV went ahead and left us to be able to look at that little puzzle. But this is the first year it's in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's the first year. It means it's in the beginning. It's early in the reign of Zedekiah. So it's at the earliest, it's 597. The year 597, 598, 597. His brother, Jehoiakim, had been king for 11 years, but he was taken away in bronze shackles. I'm not even sure if he made it to Babylon alive. And then Jehoiakim's son, Jeconiah, Jehoiakim, he was the 18-year-old king. He was king for 100 days, for 3 months and 10 days. And then Nebuchadnezzar came in and took him to Babylon to live out the rest of his days in Babylon. He was taken with basically the royal household, with a number of the government officials, with the strongest soldiers, with craftsmen, smiths. And so now those guys are gone. Jehoiakim's gone. All the good figs are gone, and Zedekiah is the king. So we know it is after 597. And there's some historical context that's going on in the world at this time that really adds, which we're going to talk about in a minute, that really adds context and gives us a broader picture of what's happening. So we read in verse 1, but I'm going to fix it. "In the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah, son of Josiah, king of Judah, came this word to Jeremiah from Adonai, saying, Thus says Adonai to me, make straps and yoke bars and put them on your neck." So the Lord comes to Jeremiah and instructs him with another symbolic act. This one had to be thrilling to receive. He is to put on a yoke. He is to make a yoke and put it on. Of course, a yoke is a common instrument that was used in the Near East to bind animals together as a means of production. And as time passed, it also became symbolic for talking about control and punishment. Ownership, political servitude. So if you wore the yoke, you were under the control of the one who drove the yoke. So Jeremiah is to make a yoke and put it on. Yay, you get to play dress up. And he's got to walk through the city wearing this yoke. Verse 3. It says, "Then send them, shalachtim, send them to the king of Edom, to the king of Moab, to the king of Ammon's children, to the king of Tyre, and to the king of Sidon, by the hand of messengers that come to Jerusalem, to King Zedekiah of Judah." So Jeremiah is told to make a yoke and wear it as an object lesson for these envoys, for these messengers that have come to Zedekiah. They've come from the nations in the north, where current Lebanon is, up in the northwest, where there's in Sidon and Tyre, and then in the southeast you've got the king of Edom and the king of Moab, which is like a modern day Jordan area. And so he's got to either make a yoke for them or deliver to them this word. Whether he's supposed to make gifts, like each of them, here, take this back to your king, I'm not exactly sure. Some biblical scholars say that it's the message that he sends with them. But the text leaves open the idea that they're to take a yoke back. I don't know if they would be like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't know. But you can only imagine how silly Jeremiah must have felt as he, tries to maneuver through the city, wearing this crossbar through the crowds of this city. But it leaves as he wears this yoke, it leaves an imprint. It leaves an image for these envoys to remember as they take this message back to their kings. And without reading too much into the text, there's something that was historically going on that can explain potentially why in this case, why these envoys were there to King Zedekiah, because it's not as though they necessarily had embassies as they are today in Jerusalem. But by this time, all of these nations, Tyre, Sidon, Edom, Moab, they were all under Nebuchadnezzar's rule. And so what had happened back in Babylon around 595, so this could be happening because it's in the beginning of the reign, around 595, there was an attempted coup back in Babylon, in the province of Babylon. There was an attempted coup of Nebuchadnezzar where they tried to overthrow him. And so Nebuchadnezzar was really having to deal with things back home, with things in his province, in the region of Babylon. And so there was a period of time where he was basically not able to focus on the empire, on the international, on the nations in his empire, because he was having to deal with this problem back home. So it's not unlikely that some of these nations, the neighbors surrounding Israel, had come together, or surrounding Judah had come together in order to maybe discuss building a coalition to throw off the yoke of Nebuchadnezzar. Look, things aren't going well for him back home. There's a problem back there, and so this is our chance. This is our opportunity to get our freedom. And so that's what's happening in Babylon at the time, and that potentially lends an understanding to what's going on right now in Judah. And so before they go home to their leaders with visions of rebellion dancing in their heads, Jeremiah gives them other gifts to send these things, to send either these yokes or to send the message of the yoke back to these kings. And so here's the message that the Lord is sending through these envoys back to these nations. Basically, the Lord says to Moab and Edom, to Tyre and Sidon, don't even think about revolting. Don't even think about rebelling or trying to throw off the yoke. Verse 4, charge them, these envoys, charge them to their masters, saying, thus says Adonai Tsevaot, the God of Israel, thus will you say to your masters, I have made the earth, mankind, and beast which are on the face of the earth by my great power and by my outstretched arm. And I give it to who it seems right to me, or who it seems right in my eyes. I'm the one who made the earth. I'm the one who made everything in it. And I give it to what's right in my eyes. So here's what these kings need to realize, whether they understand it, whether they don't understand it, that the God of Israel, the Lord of hosts, the one who made the earth, who made everything in it by his power, he gives authority to whomever he sees fit to, whether you understand it or not. Verse 6 says, so now I have given all these lands into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, my servant. So again, he calls him my servant. I have even given the beasts of the field to serve him. All the nations will serve him and his son and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. And then many nations and great kings will make him their slave. So all these nations, all these kings need to recognize that God at this time has placed Nebuchadnezzar as king. And the Lord has set an expiration date for Nebuchadnezzar's empire. His son, his grandson, who's Belshazzar, which we read about in Daniel chapter 5. They'll serve as kings until their time is up, and then they will become the slaves of many nations and great kings. So that's what that's the message the Lord is sending to these kings. And it's a message that's in a minute going to be repeated to Zedekiah, the king of Judah. And the point is this: whether you see it or whether you can see it, whether you don't see it, God's working in ways that can't be imagined. That God is using the king of Babylon for his own disciplinary purposes. And here's what's amazing is by this time God has already begun giving dreams to Nebuchadnezzar. So you'll remember that Nebuchadnezzar made his first incursion into the land in the year 605, right? That's when he took Daniel and Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, and others back to Babylon. That was back in 605. That was back during the 4th year of Jehoiakim. So that was some 7 or 8 years ago at least. Daniel's been in Babylon for nearly a decade, but for at least 7 or 8 years. He's been there since the beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, since Nebuchadnezzar first started and took them into Babylon. And God's already using these young men for his purposes. What people can't begin to see is what the Lord is moving and what he's doing. So, for instance, when you read in Daniel chapter 2, verse 1, it says, in the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, right? In the 2nd year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, and so he has this dream. And you'll remember this story from Daniel chapter 2. But that was, if you're hearing, when we're here in Jeremiah 27, those dreams started coming 4 or 5 years ago, right? By Babylonian reckoning, the 2nd year of his reign would have been about the year 603, 602. So this has happened. This was 4 or 5 or more years ago that the Lord gave him these dreams. And you remember this story where this nutso king has this dream, and he wakes up. And he's so upset by the dream that he calls all his wise men, and he says, I want you to tell me what I had the terrible dream. And they're like, tell us what it means. And then he says to them, in his craziness, he says, no. You tell me the dream, and then you tell me what it means. And he goes, well, they go, no, nobody can do that. And it so enrages him. It so enrages this nut job king in Babylon that he says, you know what? I want them all slaughtered. And he starts having wise men killed, and he's having them hunted down. And so Daniel, there are people looking to execute Daniel. And so Daniel and the guys, they get together and they pray and they seek the Lord. And the Lord, who, by the way, the Lord gave this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. The Lord sort of poked at Nebuchadnezzar's insecurities, even sort of prompted that would set all of this in motion, gave him this dream. And then the Lord, now in response to Daniel's prayer, gives Daniel the dream, tells him what the dream is and the meaning of it. So Daniel goes, you read through the chapter, he ends up before the king, and he tells him the meaning of the dream. And he says, well, there was a statue, had a head of gold, had a torso of silver, had legs of iron, had feet kind of mixed of clay and iron. And that head of gold is you. And that silver, each of the next are the kings that will come after you, who are not as great as you are. And he said, and then I saw in the dream, he saw this rock, which was not cut out by hands, but this rock that came down and it smashed the feet. And the statue toppled over, and it basically into smithereens. It became like dust, and then like chaff, and the wind came through and blew it away, and it was forgotten. It was no more. It was gone. It wasn't there. And then this rock that had come, that had shattered this, became great and became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And he says, that's you. And basically, and God, that there's going to be an end to your kingdom. He goes through this whole thing. And so Nebuchadnezzar, later we get more about the dream, but Nebuchadnezzar is so impressed that Daniel is able to give him the dream and then the interpretation, but he hears the interpretation, but I think he's so impressed that he's able to give him the dream, and he loves that he's the head of gold and that the other kingdoms are inferior to him. And he loves that. And so he says, hey, teenager, that's Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, Daniel's a teenager. He's like, you're going to be the head of the province of Babylon. And Daniel's like, well, what about my friends here? Can they be put in positions? And he's like, sure. And he makes them administrators in the province of Babylon. And so now, and that's around 603, 602. So by the time it's 597 and the 18-year-old king and everybody is being brought, this wave of exiles is being brought into Babylon, God has already put in place as the ruler over the province of Babylon his own servant, Daniel, a godly man. God has already put him. Nebuchadnezzar's not godly. Nebuchadnezzar's God's tool, God's servant. And God is using him and working and using. Nobody could begin to imagine how God's using this mad king to accomplish his purposes. And around this time, here's what's amazing, by the way. I think what's so incredible is that it's not unlikely that this whole, that the whole situation with the, okay, so so he puts them in place. And then, because of his dream, Nebuchadnezzar now has a gold statue built, right? 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. And it's all gold, solid gold. So even though the dream had just the head of gold, he's like, I don't know if he thinks he can override God's intentions by his own will. If he can make the whole thing gold, and that way it will end, his expiration date won't happen, that when the rock comes down and shatters the feet, now the feet will be feet of gold, and forget it, that he will be able to avert God's purposes. Either way, he decides he's going to build this statue. And then says, now everyone has to bow before this. So that whole event of the building of the statue and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being put into the fiery furnace, it's not unlikely that is happening at the same time that this message is happening in Jeremiah 27. Because it's when the coup failed. When the coup failed, then Nebuchadnezzar, sort of insecure, like had to say, I'm king, remembers this dream, right? And nobody came after me. The gold is still standing. And he makes the whole solid statue of gold. And then calls all of his, he brings all of his regional leaders, all the governors over the regions, calls them back because they need to now declare fealty to him. And so one scholar tells us, it says, when Nebuchadnezzar's dealing with the coup after the coup attempt failed, it's likely that Nebuchadnezzar summoned all his provincial rulers and vassal kings back to Babylon for a loyalty oath. Those who had proved themselves loyal at the royal court in Babylon would have been exempt from the ceremony, which would explain why Daniel didn't have to appear at the gathering. He had been with Nebuchadnezzar at the king's court. But Daniel's 3 friends were summoned with the other officials because they had been serving as administrators in the province of Babylon. So all that's going on. And at the same time is this message that's saying, don't try to throw off the yoke of Babylon, because God's working there. And by the way, just because the king of Babylon is God's servant doesn't mean that his commands are righteous. Doesn't mean his ways are righteous, right? When he says, bow before this golden statue, do those who follow the Lord, who are faithful to the Lord, do they bow? They do not bow. And the Lord is with them through the fire. The Lord brings them through the fire. And the Lord uses over and over the madness of the king to accomplish his purposes. It's not an endorsement of the insane egotism of King Nebuchadnezzar, right? It's a utilizing the insanity and the egotism of Nebuchadnezzar for his purposes. Because when those boys come through the fire, the King Nebuchadnezzar, who could have imagined that he would have prayed this in Daniel chapter 3, Verse 31, King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages who dwell in all the earth, may your peace abound. It seemed good to me to declare the signs and wonders that God Most High has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, his dominion from generation to generation. I mean, who could have imagined that the mad king is going to say these kinds of things? And then, of course, the last words we hear from Nebuchadnezzar when he is eventually broken, after he's been like a crazy man for seven years with nails growing like bird claws and hair insane, and he's like an animal in the field. But he finally humbles his heart. He humbles his heart and looks up to God and recognizes that he is not God and that God alone is Lord, and he is humbled. And so at the end of his the last thing we get from Nebuchadnezzar in Scripture, he says, Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, because all his works are right and his ways just. He is able to humble those who walk in pride. And that's how it ends for Nebuchadnezzar. And the Lord sees that. The Lord knows that. The Lord knows what he has to lead Nebuchadnezzar through. The Lord knows the nutty things that Nebuchadnezzar's going to do, driven by his ego, like throwing the guys in the furnace. He knows that he's going to have to break his pride. The Lord is working through Nebuchadnezzar. He's working in Nebuchadnezzar, but he's not endorsing Nebuchadnezzar's ways. He is working. And so the Lord says to these guys, tell your kings, and he's going to say to Zedekiah, whether you get it or not, I've chosen Nebuchadnezzar. So Jeremiah says, hey, ambassadors to these surrounding nations, do you see me willingly obeying the Lord, wearing this yoke, this humiliating, clunky yoke around the city? I want you to take this visual. I want you to take this message and maybe take this little gift, this yoke replica that I made. Aw, how sweet, thank you. Take it back to your king. And your only chance to survive is to wear the yoke, to willingly submit to the yoke I've placed you under. Verse 8, Now it will be that the nation or the kingdom which will not serve the same king, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, and will not put their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon, that nation I will punish with the sword, with famine, and with pestilence, declares Adonai, until I have destroyed it by his hand. But as for you, don't listen to your prophets, your diviners, your dreams, your soothsayers, or your sorcerers who speak to you, saying, You will not serve the king of Babylon, for they're prophesying a lie to you, in order to remove you far from your land, so that I would drive you out and you would perish. You might say, I don't get it. I don't understand. How could it be the will of the Lord for Nebuchadnezzar to rule? Here's the deal. The Lord called us to submit to his ways, to his commands, right? To a life of blessing. Choose life that you and your children may live. But the people of Judah and the surrounding nations and the world rejected his ways, chose our own ways. And so in Nebuchadnezzar, the Lord is giving us the fruit of our own ways. This is what you wanted, he says. You didn't know this is what you wanted, but this is what you asked for. This is what, every time you've said no to me. The rule of Nebuchadnezzar and all that comes with that is actually what you've been asking for. Every time you reject God's ways, you choose your own ways, what you're saying is, I want the king of Babylon to rule over me. You don't know that's what you're saying, but that's what you're saying because that's the direction you're heading. So again, the Lord says this is what you ask for. Since you know so much better, since you've convinced yourself you don't need my ways, you will wear the yoke you insisted on wearing. At this point, your only hope is to submit to the discipline you're under, to let the pain of this discipline humble you and teach you. He says, don't run to every other kind of voice looking for what you want to hear. You don't like this message? No, that can't be possibly right. God couldn't want us to be under the yoke of the king of Babylon. Couldn't possibly be from the Lord. He says, whether that voice sounds godly like one of your prophets, or whether you're running to other twisted forms of spirituality that around you, the diviners, the sorcerers, the soothsayers, looking for the word that says you don't have to face the consequence. You won't serve the king of Babylon. The more you keep resisting the Lord's discipline, the worse it will get for you. The king of Babylon is God's servant of discipline for God's people, for their idolatry, for their rejection of his ways. And he says, okay, I'll give you exactly what you asked for. Verse 11, but the nation that will bring their neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, that nation I will let remain in its land, and they will till it and dwell in it. It is a declaration of Adonai. So talk about a counterintuitive instruction from the Lord. He says the nation that will willingly submit to the discipline of the Lord will be allowed to remain in the land. Meaning, basically, those who think they can assert their own way and say, no, we're not going to submit to the king of Babylon. No, we're not going to put ourselves under his yoke. No, 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 no. The Lord says, look, you've already rejected my word. You've rejected me over and over. That's why you're in this situation. So here's the deal. Here's what I'm offering you. I'm offering you a sentence of, what do you call it when you're in prison at home? House arrest. You can be under the yoke and stay at home and dwell in the land until it. You can stay in your house under house arrest and wear this yoke. Or you can go, no, I'm not gonna. And you won't even get to be in your house. I will take you. You may not even get to live. So you decide. That's up to you. But this discipline is happening whether you like it or not. So you can either humble yourself to it and receive it, or you can keep fighting it the way you've always fought me, and it's only going to get worse for you. So now Jeremiah, that was to the surrounding nations. Now Jeremiah himself speaks to the king, to Zedekiah, with those very same instructions. Then I spoke to King Zedekiah of Judah with all these same words, saying, put your necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon, Serve him and his people and live. Like serve the king that you yourself would never want to serve. Why should you die, you and your people, by the sword, by famine, or by pestilence, as Adonai has spoken against the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon? The Lord has spoken against the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon. Don't listen to the words of the prophets who speak to you, saying, you will not serve the king of Babylon, for they prophesy a lie to you. For I have not sent them, says Adonai, and they prophesy falsely in my name, with the result that I will drive you out, and that you will perish, you and the prophets that prophesy to you. So Jeremiah comes to the king of his land, his king, with the same message, saying, submit to the discipline of the Lord. Willingly put your neck under the yoke of the king of Babylon. These people who have continually stiffened their neck to the Lord, he says, now lower your neck, humble your neck, put your neck under the yoke, receive the discipline I'm giving you, walk in it. Walk in it and let it teach you. Let it instruct you. And he pleads with the king, please, why should you die? Just do this. Jeremiah already knows that the religious establishment is going to say something very different. The false prophets are saying, no, we will not serve the king of Babylon. And God's going to bring back everything. You know, when Nebuchadnezzar came and took Jeconiah, took Jehoiakim and everybody, he also took all the gold from the temple. He took all the gold stuff from the temple. Didn't take everything, just all the gold. Took all the gold stuff. Maybe he wanted to use it for his special statue. I don't know. But he took all the gold stuff from the temple. And the false prophets and the priests are saying, no, we're going to get that gold's coming back. It's coming back. And we're not going to serve the king of Babylon. And that sounds spiritual, doesn't it? I mean, and it sounds like they're patriotic, like they love their land. Submit to an invading king? How weak of Jeremiah. What a coward. No, king, be tough. You will not serve the king of Babylon. Jeremiah says they sound faithful. They sound loyal. They sound like they're saying a good thing for the love of God and the love of country and the love of your people, but they're full of lies. They're prophesying lies to you. If you follow the faithfulness of these prophets, you won't save yourself or save your nation. You'll destroy it. It's really stunning that the people and the king aren't listening to Jeremiah. It really is, because Jeremiah has been saying these things for a long time. And for a long time they said, no harm can happen to Jerusalem. Nothing can happen to Judah. Where the Lord's, well, after the Babylonian incursion back in 605 and then again in 597, it's established beyond doubt, beyond dispute, that the city of Jerusalem is not invincible. And the idea that the temple can't be violated as well. This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. Well, Nebuchadnezzar's come and taken from the temple everything made of gold. So between the incursion into the city, the incursion into the temple, the multiple deportations of the strongest and the best, and even the king himself taking them back to Babylon, all of that has proven that these false prophets who said shalom, shalom, that they were wrong. But the people still want to hear what they have to say. They like the message. They don't like the reality. They want a lie. They keep running after lies. They beg to hear lies. Those false prophets aren't done. Because now their question, what the controversy now is going to be is not whether Jerusalem can be invaded, not whether these things can happen, but the question will now be, well, how long is it going to be? And now the false prophets are going to go, well, you know what, this is just a real quick thing. You know what, this is just not going to last long. That's going to be their new message. Not that we can't be invaded. We got to change our message. Now it's going to be, it's not going to last long, and God's going to bring back everything quickly. So, after having spoken to the king, Jeremiah spoke to the priests and the people. He says, then I spoke, verse 16, then I spoke to the Kohanim and to all the people, saying, thus says Adonai, don't listen to the words of your prophets who prophesy to you, saying, see, the vessels of Adonai's house will now quickly be brought back. Shuvah will return from Babylon, for they prophesy a lie to you. Don't listen, he says. Because these people are saying, hey, the vessels from the house of Adonai will quickly be brought back to you. I mean, that sounds good, right? Amen. He's bringing back what the enemy stole. Come on now. That sounds like faith. Behold, the word of the Lord, these vessels that were taken from the house very soon will be coming back. Yeah, that sounds like something God will do. That sounds really spiritual. You won't serve the king of Babylon. That's not God's will. Sometimes that may be the word of the Lord, but it's not always. And in the season of discipline, it's not. Jeremiah says, look, guys, don't listen to them. Sounds super spiritual, but it's a lie. And then Jeremiah delivers the actual word from the Lord, and it doesn't sound like what you would expect God to say. Verse 17, do not listen to them, to the false prophets. Serve the king of Babylon and live. Why should this city become a ruin? Again, serving the king of Babylon doesn't mean bowing before his gold statue, just in case anyone's unclear. Jeremiah is so outnumbered by these faith preachers who prophesy words that sound like faith, but they are just spiritual sounding deception. The word of the Lord here says, serve the king of Babylon. Verse 18 says, but if they are prophets, and if the word of Adonai is with them, let them now make intercession, which is like, let them now, it uses this word, yifgunah, let them bombard, assail strongly now, please. Let them make intercession, like intense intercession to Adonai Tsevaot, that the vessels that are left in the house of Adonai, in the palace of the king of Judah, and in Jerusalem would not go to Babylon. If these guys are really prophets, if they really talk to the Lord, if they really have an encounter with the Lord, here's what they need to do. They need to go, Lord, please don't let what's left be taken. They're saying the gold's coming back. And Jeremiah says, they need to be praying that the silver that's here doesn't get taken. That the very little that we have, discipline has begun. Don't make it worse. Submit to the discipline, otherwise it's going to get worse. Verse 19, for thus says Adonai Tsevaot concerning the pillars, the sea, the bases, the sea being the water, the pool of the water in the temple, the bases and the rest of the vessels that remain in this city, which King Nebuchadnezzar has not taken when he carried away captive Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, from Jerusalem to Babylon, along with all the nobles of Judah and Jerusalem. Yes, thus says Adonai Tsevaot, the God of Israel, concerning the vessels that remain in the house of Adonai, in the house of the king of Judah, and at Jerusalem. They will be brought to Babylon, and there they will be until the day that I take note of them. It is a declaration of Adonai, and bring them up and restore them to this place. So again, there's an opportunity to respond to the present discipline if you'll humble your hearts and finally submit to the Lord to stave off more painful discipline. God keeps giving opportunity to respond, because otherwise what you have left will be taken. As always, the issue is a heart issue. A heart that is humble to say, if the people having seen that discipline has begun, what will it take? What will it take for you to humble your heart? Does everything have to be taken away? Do you have to go, no? When the discipline begins, you have to go, no, this can't be from God. No, we're not going to serve the king of Babylon. No, and you're going to continue to harden your will against what God is saying. And when he's saying the discipline is happening, whether you like it or not, either submit to the discipline and let it break you in a way that so you can be reformed and reshaped, so that you can be a clay jar, a clay pot that is reshaped. Let it break you so you can be reformed. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything if you keep stiffening your neck rather than lowering your neck under the yoke the Lord has placed you under. It sounds spiritual. It sounds like faith to say we won't serve the king of Babylon. God's bringing back what the enemy stole. It sounds unspiritual to say serve the king of Babylon. It sounds unspiritual, like Jeremiah has no faith, to say the gold's staying in Babylon for a long time until God says otherwise, so just deal. Sometimes what sounds spiritual isn't. It's of the flesh. And sometimes what sounds like it's of fear is actually a submission to what God has brought and to what God is bringing. There are times when God brings a discipline and we have to recognize that discipline. And rather than to stiffen our necks against it, that we humble ourselves and receive the discipline and let it shape us and cleanse us and purify us. Lord, is this what you're doing? Are you disciplining us? Are you cleansing us? Then may our hearts be humbled to receive what you're doing and to know that in your time that you will restore all things, and to even know that even right now, while you're doing things we can't even begin to imagine, while you're telling us to serve a king we can't even begin to imagine would be the king we should serve, that if that's the king you want us to serve, whoever it may be, Lord, that we would not bow to his idol, but that we would walk in submission to you and let this discipline form us and shape us. Let us be shaped by what you're doing. And for us to know that you're working in ways we can't see, that you're working through the insanity of what we can't even begin to imagine. You're working in the midst of all of that, out of our sight, to prepare the way, that the Lord was preparing Babylon for the good figs. The Lord is preparing Babylon for those first fruits to come there, to wait while he cleanses the land, while he clears the land, and he's going to come back to replant. The Lord knows what he's doing on multiplied levels. And we need to be submissive to him. Over the last almost 6 months now, right? 5.5 months, it's been, wait, Lord, what are you doing? And we just have to say, Lord, give us ears to hear. As this is for what you have allowed, what you're doing, let it shape us. We don't need to stiffen our necks. We need to soften our hearts and say, give us ears to hear your voice and a heart to do your will. Amen. Well, let me say good morning to everybody else that I missed. Good morning to Joyce and to Joe. Good to see you guys. Good morning to Cindy again. And then Katrina. Good morning to you as well. And to Elizabeth and Salome and Philip and Jesse. And good morning to Lori and Pat. And good morning to John and Jan. And to Jeff, good morning to you guys. I want to say this at the end, because some people can try to begin to read into. It's interesting. When we're in a political season like this, and things are spoken over the candidates one way or the other, and there's a very clear view on who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, and two different sides have an idea of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Understand that the Lord allows people to be in the places of power that they're in, whether they're the good guy or the bad guy, that the Lord is over all. And if the Lord allows a king, as it were, to be in place that you say that couldn't possibly be of the Lord, be sure that we don't have the heart of those who wanted to listen to the false prophets, that we'll submit to what the Lord allows, to what the tools that the Lord uses, while not necessarily bowing to all the ways of whatever king that it is. That our hopes and our desires don't rest on whoever the king is. It doesn't rest on a political result, because God is working above and beyond. God's working through the willful sin of people. He's using what is not his will, but using for his purposes. It's not God's desire that any should walk in sin, but he also doesn't override our will. So he'll use what's going on to accomplish his purposes. So keep your eyes on him. Keep our hearts humbled, focused on him, listening to him, calling on him. Amen? All right. Well, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Shalom, shalom. Have a beautiful day.